The following video presentation was recorded March 11, 1995 in Atlanta, Georgia, at the opening general session of the 41st annual meeting of the American Society on Aging. The Future of Aging and Aging Services, a call for a new paradigm and vision. With Robert N. Butler, Ken Dychtwald, Betty Friedan, and moderator Fernando Torres-Gil.
Welcome and good afternoon. It's great to be here in Atlanta, Georgia, the home of the 1996 Summer Olympics, a wonderful city and region in its own right, our first opportunity to be here in the south of this great country. And we certainly thank all of you for being here. We have a wonderful program for you today. It is about the great changes that are facing our nation and, for that matter, much of the world. It is about the pending millennium, when just 5 years from now, we'll be in the year 2000. In just 15 years from now, the first of our older baby boomers like myself will be turning 65. And that demographic trend will certainly have an impact in many different ways across the whole society. Certainly we see some of these changes played out in the political debates of today, whether it's around entitlements, the status of Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, or whether it's about our budget and how we can balance it and how we can avoid leaving a debt to future generations. These are all ultimately about aging and how we will confront it. But it is also about much more. It's about this nation's future and how we want our country to look like, how we want and wish our relationships between citizens, government, and our communities to be. It is about how we confront diversity and social changes and changing attitudes, how perhaps we need to redefine what it means to be older, to age, and to be a citizen of this country. This year is certainly an appropriate time to discuss these issues and to bring together some of the nation's leading experts to portray the need to come up with a new paradigm and a new vision. 1995, in many respects, is a window of opportunity, perhaps our last great chance to prepare for the future. Certainly, we are at an unprecedented historical moment where never before in the history of the world do we have the opportunities to live a long life and hopefully a good long life. But there will be turmoil, there will be shocks, and there will be adjustments. But I think there will also be much excitement and tremendous opportunities as we confront these dramatic changes. And certainly this year we should take note that there are various anniversaries that I think give us the opportunity to step back and ask, how can we change? How should we redefine? How must we reassess how we have done things in the past to prepare for the future? The 30th anniversary of the Medicare program, the Social Security program, Medicaid, as well, the 30th anniversary of Medicare, Medicaid, and the Older Americans Act, the 60th anniversary of the Social Security system, another great milestone, the 20th anniversary of Gloria's arrival as executive director of this organization, as well as the 50th anniversary of the end of prohibition. I think the last two are related, but I'm not sure. Be that as it may, we also have another important forum in this year, the 1995 White House Conference on Aging, called by Bill Clinton. This will be the last such conference in this century. It will define aging policy for the next, and what you do today, what our speakers will share with us, what we discuss and debate in the days to come in this organization and through our White House Conference on Aging events will give us an opportunity to shape that aging policy. And thus, this session is about the future of aging and aging services, a call for a new paradigm and a new vision. And we have, as mentioned earlier, three wonderful, talented visionaries. I will introduce each one in turn when they come up. You have before you, on my left, your right, Bob Butler, Betty Friedan, and Ken Dychtwald, who will share their views, their thoughts, their insights. We are asking them to press the edge of the envelope, to be bold, to cause us to think and to reconsider, to be provocative. We don't expect agreement among you, but we certainly respect your diverse viewpoints. Unlike myself, as a political appointee with some constraints about what I can say and should say. You have no constraints. No one can take your job away, so you are free to do and say what you wish, and I know that you will. And so with that, the way we will proceed, we will begin with Dr. Bob Butler, then followed by Betty Friedan, and then Dr. Ken Dychtwald. Each will be given 20 to 25 minutes. They are disciplined individuals who will adhere to it without any need for reminders. And then we will open it up, and I will present a series of questions. They will engage in open dialogue, and I believe in that way we can benefit from their advice and insights. And then when it is all over, I will have the final word as a closing moderator. So with that in mind, let me now introduce the first of our wonderful speakers. And I just have to say, on a personal note, being here before these three individuals, I feel like a student again in graduate school, so slightly nervous, because each of them has influenced my career in different ways. Bob Butler, as many of you know, is the chair of the Department of Geriatrics and Adult Development at Mount Sinai Medical School, which is a first geriatric program among U.S. medical school, a longtime pioneer and advocate for geriatric issues for senior citizens. He began his career well before many of us entered the field, and already by 1976 he was having a tremendous impact with his book, Why Survive, which received a Pulitzer Prize. He has continued to be involved in the field. He was our first director of the National Institute on Aging. He has continued to push all of us to be on top of what is occurring and to respond to the very real needs of older persons, younger persons, and all Americans. But he has not let that keep him from a diverse variety of areas. Just recently, he and his wife, Dr. Myrna Lewis, published a wonderful book, which he's asked me to read, and I will get to it perhaps later tonight, entitled Love and Sex After 60. And I think you may all find it interesting. Most recently, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, our president, Bill Clinton, appointed Dr. Robert Butler as the chair of the advisory committee to the 1995 White House Conference on Aging. Continuing, please. Continuing Dr. Butler's lifelong involvement with White House conferences, having been a delegate in 1961, 1971, helping to coordinate the 1981 White House Conference on Aging, and now chairing its very important committee. Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Fernando. You did leave out, I think, that it's also the 20th anniversary of the National Institute on Aging.
Oh, thank you.
I'm very honored, of course, for the opportunity to be the chair of the advisory committee on the White House Conference on Aging, and look forward to it being not a passive instrument, but a very active and vocal one, perhaps with the same kind of spirit as we were invited to have today, with the delegates and everyone related to that White House Conference speaking up, speaking their mind, and certainly moving to protect the integrity of Social Security and Medicare. Before I fantasize about the future, let me point out that the future is certainly built upon the present. And since the Enlightenment and since the Industrial Revolution, people have been more or less giddy with the concept of progress. But it does seem to me that we may be engaged in the reinvention of progress, a kind of retrogression in terms of the stature and protection, social protections of our people. And to me, that's a great concern, which I must bring to your attention as I think about the future. Because if we don't sustain a strong and vital present, we really put that future in jeopardy. We see, I believe, a growing social insecurity in this country, a growing disparity between rich and poor, more and more inequality. We see, have seen over the last several years, a growing preoccupation with what one might call the greedy geezer syndrome, that somehow rather older people are shiftless and draining the resources from the rest of society, from young people. They are out playing golf or gardening and not making a constructive contribution to our country. Mind you, these are the people that fought in World War II. Mind you, they're the people who helped build the country which we possess and it seems very clear to me that we're talking about scapegoating. But my worry is that we've become quite passive. It's as though we've got put in a corner, that it's not quite right for older people to speak up any longer for themselves because of the effectiveness of this greedy geezer syndrome. I submit that older people must speak up for themselves. I can tell you, walking the halls of Congress as I do, seeing what happens in the canyons of Washington, D.C. on K Street, all the lobbyists are at work representing all of their special interests. This country is based upon special interest. Certainly older people should speak up just as well as any other group, but they should also speak up for others, for the country as a whole. And one of my hopes is that, indeed, this White House Conference on Aging will be profoundly intergenerational. And I very much hope, just as an example, that the membership of this society, of practitioners and thoughtful people, and then members of the mass organizations such as the National Council of Senior Citizens and the American Association of Retired Persons, will come out for kids first. And what I have in mind is the following. I find it unconscionable that we have 18 million children in this country who do not have health insurance. This, the wealthiest country in the world. I don't think older people want that to happen, and I think that children deserve a Medicare just as much as we older persons deserve a Medicare. And the quality of the life of these children is even important in terms of the future of older persons. For example, the contemporary baby boomers, when they grow older, are going to have to depend upon the productivity, and I might add the taxability, of those children who today are not receiving the kind of quality education and the kind of health care access which they richly deserve and over which they have no control. This, the land of opportunity, and that opportunity must mean an equal start for all kids in terms of those two fundamentals of education and health. Another hope that I have for the White House Conference on Aging relates to a health agenda as well as an intergenerational agenda. And I don't just mean the financing of health care. Of course that's important. And we can also reform Medicare and make it more effective. But I'm talking about a health agenda that speaks to health promotion and disease prevention, for example. We talk a good game, but we have not been effective in introducing the kinds of dietary, exercise, physical fitness, and other reforms. Hardly more than 30 or 40% of older Americans get their flu shots and their pneumococcal vaccines, their tetanus shots. We have a long way to go to build an appropriate strategy for health promotion and disease prevention, which must not only depend upon physical fitness, but what I like to call social fitness and personal fitness as well. And briefly, what I mean by that is that social fitness refers to the kind of support system, the network of relationships, and the opportunities for intimacy, which I think accounts in very significant part for the difference in life expectancy between the sexes and why women do so much better than men do. And finally, purposive fitness. It makes sense for vitally old people to remain contributory to their society. That's part of a strategy of health promotion and disease prevention, too. But a second aspect of the health agenda that's obviously very important to me is investments in biomedical, behavioral, and social research. I am very concerned about the lack of progress with respect to Alzheimer's disease and the other dementias. Some of you may be surprised to hear me say that, because you read a great deal about steps that have been understood in the pathological process that underlies the development of Alzheimer's disease. But we have not yet gone very far in the development of therapeutic interventions. And frankly, the brain is the most complex of organs. And here we are in a decade that was identified as a decade of the brain. And at the same time, we're seeing stagnation in the budget of the National Institutes of Health. Even today, the National Institute on Aging, 20 years old, receives only 4.4% of the entire NIH budget. And the basic biology of aging receives about $50 million a year. Why do I emphasize the basic biology of aging? Because it must be well known to all of you that as we grow older, we become more vulnerable to diseases and disability. It's not by accident that 50% of all cancer occurs after 65, that 80% of all cancer occurs after 50. There are underlying biological phenomena called aging, in addition to genes that cause defects and diseases, and in addition to the environment broadly defined that bring us down into illness and disability, but we're not making a necessary investment. In fact, many companies will spend at least 2% of their budget on R&D, research and development. Were we to do that for our healthcare budget, which runs about $1 trillion, not quite, soon will be, per year, we would be devoting at least $20 billion in research. That would be nearly double the $11.3 billion we're presently spending at the National Institutes of Health. But we have to bring the corporations, we have to bring individual philanthropists, we have to bring foundations into the picture too. We can no longer rely precisely and exclusively upon government for support of biomedical, behavioral, and social research. So those are at least two of the hopes that I have for the White House Conference on Aging, the health strategy and the intergenerational strategy. On the health side, I did mean to add the necessary development of geriatrics in this country. Many of you know that in Great Britain, geriatrics is the third largest specialty. Every medical school has a department of geriatrics. It's really shocking that Mount Sinai School of Medicine still is the only school with a full-scale department of geriatrics. There are many significant and wonderful programs in perhaps another 20 schools of 144, but not where medical students have to rotate through geriatrics, have to spend time in a nursing home, where we now have twice as many patients than we have in hospitals, who have to work in a health promotion clinic. And even where we do it, we struggle constantly against the traditions of medicine, where high technology, acute care becomes the emphasis. And yet we must train students in the future to know about community care, hospice care, long-term care, and health promotion. I said that we're in a situation now of great concern to me in terms of social insecurity. Our country has never had a very strong welfare state compared to Europe. It's been really quite minimal, the social protections. But what of them there are beginning to be frayed, that's safety net. And we see what strikes me as extraordinary and harsh attacks upon children, unwed mothers, women, especially older women, veterans even, because of the VA cuts, racial and ethnic minorities, legal as well as illegal immigrants, and all this in the land of immigrants. 70% of our people did not vote last November. That's why I stressed my concern about passivity. The word citizen is very important to us. That's the primary political office in our country. And yet we're not exercising that option, and a minority is able to dictate what will happen to the majority. This especially makes me feel concerned about that baby boomer generation. And I see many of you out there. You are the largest generation in U.S. history, 1/3 of our population. But in my opinion, you are a generation at risk for a variety of reasons, not alone financial. If we don't, for example, solve the problem of Alzheimer's disease before you all get there, we will have some 9 million people with Alzheimer's disease. If we do not have properly trained geriatricians, you will be left with such pointless injunctions from doctors as, what do you expect at your age? Or take it easy. Actually, quite dangerous pieces of advice. So as I say, I think we must recognize the potential dangers of facing our baby boomers. Now I'm going to get optimistic with some of my sense of some of the possibilities for the future. It's already been commented upon by Fernando Torres-Gil in his eloquent manner that this extraordinary 20th century has brought us population aging, and a remarkable increase in longevity. 40 years, really, over the last 2 centuries. Double the life expectancy today that was existent at the founding of our republic. And 60% of people over 60 actually live in the developing world. So it's not even alone an industrialized nation event. Aging societies require very profound changes in the way in which we think. They do require new paradigms. And I'm just going to address just a few strategies, interdependent, which have to do with the kinds of society we could create where we're willing to be flexible but at the same time planful. And out of that, I think we will see an increasingly mature society with rising numbers of vital older persons with accumulative judgment and experience, a mature market with new businesses with various products and services for the aging, a growing prosthetic environment that compensates for some of our deficiencies that may occur with age, a maturity to the development of gerontology and longevity science, a new appearance to aging itself, that as older people will be physically and mentally different, enjoying greater health, dementia-free, with full sexuality, productively aging, with multiple careers, growing intergenerational relationships, and even new ways of dealing with the profundity of dying and death itself. And I think we will see a reinvention of social protections, where we have and desperately work to meet the same goals, to protect all of us from that basic human insecurity, the human insecurity that's based on the fact that we all know in our hearts that a disaster can fall, a personal one, an unexpected development of a multiple sclerosis or some disease. A physical disaster is an earthquake or a flood or a hurricane. And financial disasters, we can't control them. And rich or poor, we can be affected by the absence of securing a strong safety net. Research itself will contribute, I think, to much of this, and we have the extraordinary conditions now available to us of procedures as remarkable as cloning, recombinant DNA, hybridoma technology, immunology, neurosciences, which can alter dramatically our understanding of both physiology and pathophysiology. Aging will be subject to new forms of intervention to reduce the dysregulation that occurs, the incoordination of physiological systems. We can make even better use of positron emission tomography, of various other forms of magnetic imaging in order to better understand the processes that are occurring in our bodies. The life cycle itself will be increasingly under control, from in vitro fertilization to experimental manipulation of longevity, even in humans, through more effectively utilizing techniques of caloric restriction and free radical scavenging. Genetic markers will make early diagnosis and prevention more and more possible, and combined with behavioral strategies, for example, identification of particular cancers in particular bodies and changing diet and other behaviors to take that into account. We will learn an enormous amount from the Human Genome Project, the results of which will be due, and are already beginning to pour out, but will be due in the year 2005. We will understand better how cholesterol clogs human arteries and causes strokes and heart attacks. Improved cholesterol-lowering drugs will be available. Medicinal drainos, you might say, or lasers will unclog arteries. Reduction of atherosclerosis, which is a generalized disease, will improve myriad functions and mitigate problems ranging from sexuality to benign senescent forgetfulness. Cancer will be much more effectively treated, both at the direct cellular level through monoclonal antibodies and through more attention being spread to the mechanism of metastases. Because if the cancer just sat there and didn't move, it would not have, except in certain constrained places like the brain, would not have its diabolical consequences. Immunological techniques will help maintain the strength of the immune system. We will see, I hope, an explosive growth in the field of geriatrics and the utilization of an egalitarian interdisciplinary team highlighting the important role of the nurse, the social worker, and not just the physician, as we gain control over the medical mystique. Medicare-supported hospice care will grow. A humanistic therapy of dying will be devised that promotes patient-controlled analgesia, but also a confrontation with the personal, existential, and spiritual suffering. We will learn more about that mystery called the brain, which will help us not only with Alzheimer's disease, but the many other dementias. Those are just a few of the kinds of medical breakthroughs that I anticipate. What about social and economic strategies? Not discussed by the Entitlements Commission is the fact that sustained productivity can solve all of those worries about the fundability of entitlements. This national strategy must depend upon science and technology. The Nobelist Robert Solow in economics pointed out that along with capital, labor, and natural resources, the human imagination is the source of economic prosperity. How many of us in 1895 would have imagined what we have today, from television to lasers to airplanes moving in the sky to all of the many businesses that have been built in this century? Imagine then the need to invest in the future for the 21st century. We gave up the superconducting super collider. So Europe has now doubled the ante and have created the superconducting super collider at CERN outside of Geneva. They will be the ones that will have the control of high particle physics and the spin-off products as a result of the inability of our Congress at that time to be responsive. Older people will make greater and greater contributions to society. Their imagination will be put to work. They will be more freely accepted, their vitality, their productivity, their contributions. We will move to a 30-hour week. We will share work among many people, following the ideas of Wassily Leontief, another Nobel Prize winner. We will do some of this in terms of maintaining creativity by an interweaving of education, work, and retirements throughout life. Australia already has extended leave sabbaticals, not just for those of us that are in academic life, but for everyone, after a certain amount of time, has a chance to retool themselves. We will see more and more people with multiple careers. The silver industries, or mature markets, will grow marketably profitable. And by the way, that's one of the most interesting things to me about the work that I'm able to do in relationship to Japan and Europe, is we seem to be very gloomy about this growing number of older persons. Japan sees this as another market, another opportunity. And think about it for a minute. We presently have $2.7 trillion in private pension funds. I'm not talking about Social Security. Private pension funds, which control 1/4 of all of the nation's securities. That's a consequence of providence, of people looking ahead, planning, putting money aside in various types of pension plans. That didn't happen in the last century either. Financial instruments, therefore, health arrangements, health technology, recreation, travel, living arrangements, all of these constitute important new industries. So when we talk about health costs, as we must also recognize that those health costs are for somebody else a job or income or profit. And that's the nature of the way in which we operate in our country. In so doing, we must be supportive of such industries. Biotechnology and pharmaceutical industry, for example. Those are already among the few industries where we have an effective balance of payment. And without the antibiotics and without the many other contributions of this century, where would we be? I think, too, that we will see a great new cultural strategy, a greater appreciation with new themes in theater, cinema, fiction, visual arts, even music that reflect age. I happen to be an admirer of to my mind, one of the great novels of the 20th century, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, a beautiful love story of age. We'll see more of that. Not only Harold and Maude, but many representations at a cultural level that will remind us that all that's romantic and exciting is not just the novels of youth, but the novels of the middle and later years. I think, too, that we will see a growing end to racism. I'd really like to bring to your attention a brand new, remarkable book called The History and Geography of Human Genes. It traces human genes using the base year 1492, a year that certainly you all remember, of Christopher Columbus, and finding that in truth, other than color and stature, we are all the same. Europeans are 1/3 from Africa, 2/3 from Asia in terms of true genetic bases. So there is no basis for racism other than our own prejudices, which we simply have to rid ourselves of. I think we'll do better with ageism and better with racism, I'm afraid, than we will do with sexism. I'm deeply disturbed by the continuing abuse of women, the failure to recognize how much the issues of age are issues of women, and the extent to which throughout the world women bear so much of the work and receive so little in the way of response. Now, a final touch of optimism. Finally, we will come to better understand ourselves. Humankind will gain at least some skill in controlling greed and addictive dependency and violent, misdirected aggression. We will succeed in negotiating arms reduction, slashing military budgets, controlling rogue countries and peoples, and avoid thermonuclear extinction. We will move toward a more balanced life of physical and mental and cultural activities, of work and play, of both enlightened self-interest and altruism. We will come to conclude that life is a primary value, a common cause to be shared and enhanced, and that longevity is a very special gift, a gift of this century, to be prudently and generously used. No one can accuse me of pessimism, but all I'm saying is this could be if we all sit on our passivity, get up off our apathy, and do what we can to see that we make this future be what it could be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, for your vision and your inspiration. Our next speaker is someone who needs no introduction, but will get an introduction. Have you ever noticed, a la Seinfeld, you've never heard anyone say he or she needs no introduction, and they always do it anyways? Well, having said that, Betty Friedan is certainly someone all of us know and admire, a citizen of great renown, a woman of great stature, from her early involvement in the women's movement, helping to define and create it, with her best-selling book, The Feminine Mystique, which continues to sell to women of all ages and even men, to her most recent book, The Fountain of Age, another bestseller, which is redefining how we should and perhaps will begin to view age and growing older. Betty Friedan has been at the forefront of opening doors for men and women of all ages facing a variety of social and complex challenges. She was the founder of the National Organization for Women, founding member of the National Women's Political Caucus. She is currently a visiting distinguished professor of public policy at George Mason. I first met Betty Friedan when she came to USC a number of years ago as a visiting professor of gerontology at the University of Southern California, where she began to do her research into this book. I knew then that not only was she a gerontologist, but she was also a committed Trojan to the University of Southern California. I have been meaning to ask her a very personal question. Did you obtain your season tickets to USC football? And if you did, may I borrow them? So, Betty Friedan is certainly someone that all of us hold in high regard. It's wonderful to have her in our field, as well as many other fields that need her leadership and her insight. I give you Betty Friedan. She will speak from the table.
The first time that I dared open my mouth about age, I mean, I'd been writing this book, you know, The Fountain of Age. I wasn't through with it, was by the invitation of the Western Gerontological Society, which you are, I guess, aren't you?
Used to be.
Used to be, right. And it was in New Mexico, and I gave my speech on why shouldn't men live as long as women? Because, you know, women, I had become aware that women's life expectancy was 80 years, and men was only 72, and at the turn of the century it was the same, 45, 46. And, you know, I thought that men should live longer. And in fact, I still do think that. You know, I think that if I were a man, I'd be very angry that the National Science Foundation isn't spending millions of dollars to find out why men are not living as long as women. And even as a woman, it makes me mad that men aren't living longer. It's lonesome when so many of them die. But I think, or I was told by some of my sisters here, that my speech then was sort of threatening somehow. I don't know why, but it was threatening. But I think it's what I've learned in breaking through an accepted paradigm, changing the paradigm about women. What I've learned in speaking the unspeakable about women and asking questions of what had been expected, that I have the temerity to come to speak to you today on the paradigm shift that you are confronting in your view of age, and that is going to happen, and that in a session like this is a part of making happen. I am probably an okay guide to tell you that a paradigm shift can happen because I and a lot of you have experienced making that paradigm shift happen about women in the last 30 years. It's interesting. It's 30 years or so since the Feminine Mystique. It's 30 years, you say, since Medicare. I mean, 30 years from now, we will be well into the new millennium, and you will not be thinking about age, even the way the most perceptive of us here still slip back into thinking about it, Just as we broke through the feminine mystique, the only image we had of women 30 years ago, only image we had of women, not only in the mass media, in the magazines, in the television, but in the sophisticated thought, in the textbooks of psychology and sociology, in the texts that the marriage counselors used and the doctors that advised women on their so-called problems. The only image of woman was woman defined in sexual relation to man and in terms of her biological role: wife, mother, sex object, housewife, server of physical needs, husband, children, home. Never as a person defining herself by her own actions in society. And if you had extrapolated in a straight line 30 years ago about women, you would have thought that the great majority of women in America would be marrying relatively young, having 3, 4, 5 children, working a little before marriage, before motherhood, or in national or family emergency, writing housewife on the census blank, and being sold everything in terms of getting the house even cleaner, using even more soap powders, or every benefit of modern science, from pre-nobility to late senility, to get, catch, keep a man, and no other concerns than that. If you would have been separating in a straight line about women 30 years ago, you would have said, and then at menopause, when all of that is over, it is the end of life for women. They will be hospitalized for involutional melancholia in great numbers. They will take to their beds with depression, And you would have extrapolated that the doctors would be working overtime with women patients with ills that they could prescribe pills for but never diagnose and wouldn't get solved, and that there would be a woman problem that seemed to be getting, 30 years ago, worse and worse, from the suburbs that were supposed to be the fulfillment of every woman's life and the envy of women the world over, the American suburb, the sexual ghetto between the hours of 9 and 5, nothing stirred over 3 feet tall, and a malaise, an angst, a noise of frustration coming out of that suburb, the woman problem. The woman problem. And if you had extrapolated 30 years ago from the conferences of male experts discussing the woman problem, what are we going to do with these frustrated, neurotic suburban housewives that won't be content with the PTA? Well, as you may remember, we broke through the feminine mystique, which was obsolete for defining the personhood of woman in an 80-year lifespan, and we began to define our own problems. And there was no more talk of the woman problem. As women began to move existentially in society as full people, and therefore claimed their human and American birthright of equal opportunity to move in the mainstream of society, and the control of their own lives, control even of their reproductive process, and a voice in the decisions of their destiny. And we sit here now, women and men, as equals, and in fact, women are a little superior because we live longer. But we would like you to live longer too. All right.
That's not the only reason.
Now, you know that my feminism has never been one of women against men. I mean, I think it's that men are here to stay, and that we have to live with them, work with them, love them if we can, walk out if they won't change. A lot of us did that, you know. And in general, hope that they will get better and live longer. Right. And when Bob Butler asked me to come to see him about 15 years ago now, and he said, I want to get you interested in age because most of the research and the policies have been done by men and about men, and yet it so happens that the majority of people in age are women. And I wasn't interested in age, please. Yuck, age. Who needs it? You know, I was this radical, front edge woman's movement. But it did interest me why women were living so much longer. And I told Bob something that I had noticed when I began to interview women that had broken through the feminine mystique, that moved beyond it. And of course, there weren't many such women in the years when I started doing that interviewing, because my generation was still home bringing up the baby boomers. And the next generation, the daughters of the feminine mystique, gave up their own education after high school or in the middle of college to put their husbands through. So they were not yet, you know, combining profession outside the home with marriage and motherhood. And so the few women that I could find like that were the older, not enough to make a pattern. Rosie the Riveters that hadn't gone home again. The remnants of that era of winning of the women's rights and the flapper era. And I noticed those women looked wonderful, and their eyes, their skin. And I said, what about the menopause? And one after another say to me, oh, I can't help you, I never had menopause. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't give you any information because, you know, I simply didn't have menopause. And my Geiger counter kind of clicked. My Geiger counter clicks when something comes from real experience, men, other women, myself, that doesn't fit the book. And I asked more questions, and of course they'd had menopause. Of course they'd had menopause. They didn't any longer have children. They didn't any longer have periods. They thought they didn't have menopause because it was no big deal. They didn't take to their beds with depression. They didn't have get hospitalized for involutional melancholia. In fact, so few women do get hospitalized now for that American Psychiatric Association a few years ago stopped using that syndrome or whatever it's called, involutional melancholia. And it wasn't the end of their lives as women. And I knew that was significant. So I said to Bob, if just changing the way we think about ourselves as women could have such a change on the aging process that those women didn't even think they had menopause, what about men? What would make men live longer? So he said, well, I don't think any of our research has actually addressed that question. So my Geiger counter clicked, and that's why, you know, I embarked on what turned out to be a 10-year ordeal, to write The Fountain of Age, which, by the way, is available in paperback outside after. Anyway, what I found, and you well know, because you've been working within its confines, was an age mystique even more pervasive, pernicious, perverted, and obsolete than the feminine mystique, defining age only as programmed deterioration from youth, only as programmed decline from youth to terminal senility, only as a problem for society, the problem of age, the age problem, And it was, to my surprise, as I dug into the research, research, in fact, done mostly within that parameter. I went up to Harvard. I was given a fellowship, teach a seminar based on my book, The Second Stage, and I could use 3/4 of my time for my own research. I went first to Harvard, and then I went out to Andrus. And the only research at Harvard that was going on age was at the medical school, and it was Alzheimer's, and it was nursing homes, and it was ethical questions in age, which turned out to be, when do you turn off the machine? And I would listen to these young Turks in their white coats, because there was money now in aging research, and they would talk about them. And they would say, do we really need to put the burden on them in deciding when we turn off the machine? And I'd heard that tone of voice before, like holding your nose. Tones of compassionate contempt or contemptuous compassion, like the male experts used to talk about, getting the women off their backs. Them. And I discovered, to my surprise, as I held my own nose and dug through that research, that there is no such thing as that programmed deterioration from youth to terminal senility. That assumption based on research done over 50 years ago on the old men in the old people's homes, removed from society, no families, their testes and their brains did shrink from disuse. But the more recent research done on men and women aging in communities, as you know, the research done in Sweden, the research done under Butler's direction in the National Institute of Health, shows that there is no serious deterioration or decline now for most people if they age in the community. Women and men aging in communities until well in their 80s, and that figure goes up after every year or just before death. I was so surprised going to these gerontological conferences, which I began to do, grand ballrooms, standing room only, incontinence in nursing homes. Way down in the basement, a little workshop, creativity in the later years. I was so surprised to discover that only 5% of Americans over 65 have Alzheimer's or any kind of senility. Only 5% are in nursing homes at any one time. And that whatever deterioration occurs is not necessarily programmed, because there's more difference in the people over 50 than in any other time of life, that it depends on what you do and what you don't do more than anything else. It depends on what society lets you do or doesn't let you do. And that furthermore, as I dug further into the research and began myself to do interviews of women and men that I thought would be very rare at first, like Grandma Moses, that were not fitting that image of deterioration and terminal decline, that growth and development can occur throughout life. The paradigm shift come when we break through the obsession with youth, the idea that youth defines the peak, and see this new period of human life, this new third of life that people can have after menopause, after 50, more than a third of life for women, and men may catch up to that see it as a new period of human life. But further, the paradigm shift will mean seeing all of life in different terms, when we break through the blind spot that comes from the obsession with youth. Now, the problem of age, not the problem of age. If we break through this paradigm shift, if we make this paradigm shift, if we break through this mystique of age as decline, we will be thinking in terms of a productive human life of 75, 80 years. We will be asking terms now in the paradigm shift. We should be asking, well, yes, of course, if we must have nursing homes, but we should be asking, you say about services, what services will enable people to stay in their communities and stay in control of their own lives and keep being productive? If the research shows, as it does, even that massive research that's archived in Baltimore on the National Institute of Health, the National Institute on Age, what are the most important things for a vital age, for a long vital life? Well, a few things like not smoking, but the main ones, you know this, are purposes and projects that give complex structures to your days and keep using your abilities in society, and bonds of intimacy. So we must ask even now, more important than what services do we need for these patients, which really don't have to be any more than that 5%, and maybe not even that 5% if they were able to live human lives in the years after 50 and were not forced out of productive work. But we have to ask new questions. Do you have to work the way you worked when you were 30 or not worked at all? Do you have to love the way you loved when you were 30 or not love at all? Do you need the power you thought you needed when you were 40? Or be an utterly passive, recipient of nursing home care? New questions. Do you need to live life as if it's over? Not only at 60, when you are forced out, as men are at most careers and women increasingly, but if the job downsizing now going on, forced out at 45 to 54 is where most of the job downsizing happens, and then be walled off in some geriatric playpen, in some walled retirement village on the edge of the desert, to be kept out of sight of the larger community to remind them that they're going to grow old too, or even pick one with great forethought based on continuing care with a nursing home tucked in one corner, a little bit out of sight, so that your children will never have to put you in a nursing home. Well, that's the kind of question you'd have to start asking on the new paradigm now. But I think that doesn't even begin to confront the new paradigm. I'll tell you when the breakthrough came for me. I was interviewing for the Fountain of Age, and I was interviewing a woman in Palm Springs. She had dyed brilliant red hair. She was clearly older than I. I could see the pure white roots underneath. I had a little brown in mine still. She had very crepey legs under a miniskirt. My legs are quite good. All right, still. And she said to me, how nice. You're doing a book for those poor old people. And I said to her, I'm not writing a book about them. I'm writing a book about us. And she said, oh, not me. I'm never going to get old. I'm never going to get old. Us, ourselves growing older. A paradigm shift not only in the way we will be thinking of ourselves, and people will be thinking of themselves, men and women, as they hit 50, 60, 70, 80 after the turn of the century, and know that they are in the middle of a vital life in their second career, their third career, or it's a new mix, back to school again, going to law school at 60, as women tell me they are now going to do, knowing they have 15 years yet to live. But how will we be feeling about us, about ourselves growing older, when it's in our gut at 25 and at 35 that we will be living 80 years or more. And that we have time, you know, that we have time. How crazy it is now that women and men are working a 70-hour week or more in the child-rearing, childbearing years, putting together work and family and careers and, you know, taking care of the kids all at the same time, and then out at 45, out. With a new paradigm out of the White House conference, I hope will come, a demand for a 30-hour week, for a shorter work week for everyone that will enable women and men in the child-rearing years, you know, to better combine work responsibilities and family, that will enable people throughout their life in varying patterns to combine work and school, you know, and know from the beginning that they will maybe want to be developing in two different strains simultaneously or sequentially, and that will enable older people, women and men, to continue being productive in society and let their wisdom and their generativity be used. But they would welcome the flexibility that is the clue to hardiness at age, and work schedule that permits and expresses that flexibility. What will happen when we make this paradigm shift and we cease our blind, short-sighted adulation of youth? Adulation of youth. At the moment, the plastic surgery industry is growing, you know, is booming. At the moment, anybody can be sold anything and everything to hold on to the illusion of youth. You're going to have your face lifted 5 times, right? It will make you look young, right? No, it will make you look, you know, like a mummy, dehumanized, losing the personality, everything that is experienced that has made you you. I'm not saying that you don't have to have your face lifted if you need it to survive, but don't do it here. And don't do it here, because then you forfeit the possibility of growth and development that we know can happen now if you continue to grow and develop after 50, after 60, after 70, to the end of your life. Not programmed any more than decline is in those years, but you can become more and more authentically yourself, who you really are, and yourself as whole. And you can become a truth teller, which isn't always comfortable for those around you. This is all I'm saying, not from belief, but from the research. You can see it whole, get the whole meaning and slough off the irrelevant details. And you can be liberated from some of the things that drove you in your youth. You don't have to be Superman, Superwoman, Supermom, all that and all at once. No matter how much you've obsessed about your little breasts or your fat thighs or your big nose or your little penis or any of the things that people obsess about, you know. It's you. You embrace it. It's you. This is the way you are. And no matter how many thousands of dollars you've spent on therapy, you stop obsessing what your mother did or didn't do to you before the age of 3 or your father before the age of 5, you know. And there is a comfort and a liberation in being able to move on as a whole person yourself, and to be open to risk. That's the personal liberation. But if we, in the new paradigm, the new paradigm of age, and what will it do to our life, our larger life, our social life, our political life, it may come just in time for the salvation of this nation. At the peak of its power, but on the edge of what could be terrible decline and demise of this democracy, if we do not transcend the polarization that is tearing our society apart now, pitting the so-called angry or the greedy white male against the women and the blacks, pitting the old against the young, the culture of greed as the only measure, destroying the protections that the wisest of our forebears have brought to us over the years as our democracy has evolved, the social safety nets, the school lunches, the welfare, the protections of the environment, all the rest now. Undo it, and we see suddenly the wisdom of age is about all that stands between us and utter tragic decline in this country. We see the great older men of the Senate having the wisdom, Mark Hatfield, Harry Byrd, Moynihan, the wisdom to know that there are things in our democracy that cannot be given up, that social welfare is not a dirty word, the wisdom and the generativity. I agree with Bob Butler. The political power that is great in this society where so many of us are staying alive, that the age problem is the problem of people refusing to die. Refusing to die after 60, after 70, refusing to die after 80, the fastest growing group of the population. The political power must be used, first of all, to save Social Security and Medicare, because there is no fountain of age and the exercise of wisdom if there is not economic survival. So that is first. And in the words of Hillel, if I am not for myself, who will be, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? So it is for those who are heading for this to mobilize to save Social Security, but not alone. The real use of the political wisdom and the political power of the aging society today, the new paradigm, will be to exercise generativity in politics. Generativity is the word that Erik Erikson gave as the opposite of despair and decline. Generativity, our sense as we move into the new third of life, that our life has to have meaning in the stream of life that will go on after us, not just through our children and our grandchildren. Did you know that the great majority of people in environmental groups are women and men over 60? The other great part are the youth. That intergenerational alliance in the name of generativity, to save the children, to put the children first, as Bob Butler has said, to save the school lunches, and then, no, I'm going to, I know, I'm moving on. Anyway, the interests of life, the interests of people, men, women, and children, old and young, transcending the polarization, that is the new paradigm. And age may see it. Age may help define it. But then the paradigm of life is going to be different, not defined by youth.
I think you would agree with me that a few extra minutes for Betty Friedan was well worth it for her vision and leadership. And I think you might agree that at least on this panel, one woman is equal to at least 3 men. So, Betty, does that mean I get your tickets? Let me now introduce our third great colleague, and as Ken Dychtwald said to me a little earlier, following Bob Butler and following Betty Friedan is a lot like following Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle on the lineup. But I'm sure Dr. Dychtwald will be up to the challenge. He has been in this field for over 20 years. He is one of our nation's foremost visionaries and leading authorities on the age in America. He is a psychologist, a gerontologist, an author of many books on health and aging. His latest bestseller, Age Wave, has helped to define and popularize many of the trends which will affect all of us. He's currently working on another book which will also make a major contribution to our understanding of middle age, adolescence. He has lectured and presented seminars to over 1 million people in the U.S. on television, on cable, on radio. In many respects, Ken Dychtwald has brought to the public the work that many of you, many of us have been engaged in as scholars, as academics, as professionals, as service providers, and as policy advocates. He has brought to the general public and the popular culture much of what we have been discussing and advocating for, and for that we certainly owe him a great deal of appreciation. His firm, Age Wave, which has made a tremendous inroad in educating, gerontologizing the private sector, was recently given by ASA the Small Business of the Year Award. I present to you Dr. Ken Dychtwald.
Thanks, Fernando. What I'd like to do is to share with you my view of the future of our field and this subject. Having spent the last 20 years being a bit of a renegade and coming to some conclusions that you might find provocative, or perhaps you might agree with some or many of them. First, I really do feel that we are in a moment where we need a new paradigm. A new paradigm simply doesn't mean an extension or a Band-Aid on what we've got. It means let's roll up our sleeves, let's bring our best thinking to bear, and let's imagine what the future could need. I'd like to share with you 5 points that I think, for me, hit the target right in the center. First, I think it's time that we reflected on what a new image of aging might be. Throughout 99% of all human history, the average life expectation was under 18 years. Indeed, throughout all time on this earth, most people didn't age, they died. Literally, in the past several centuries, like a volcanic movement, we've had this surfacing of 50-year life, 60-year life, 70-year life, 90-year life, not just for a few special genetic cases, but for many. When Bismarck picked 65 as a marker of old age in the 1880s in Germany, life expectancy was only 45. In the 1930s, life expectancy was barely 63. And yet, for some strange reason, as we're about to turn the corner to a new millennium, we still keep talking about aging happening at 65. When we all know that's not when it happens anymore. The percentages who grow old are changing. Rather than 3 or 4 or 5% of our population points that might be over a particular age, let's say 65 for the moment, we're now 12, 13 percentage points. Over a quarter of our population is over the age of 50. And there's a heft and a weight to that mass that never existed before. Indeed, now it's becoming normal to age. Over the past decade, the purchase of death benefit life insurance in America has been declining because now most people don't think they're going to die young. The big fear now is, what if I live too long? By the way, in the marketplace, you see the growth in what are called annuities. I would also argue that, at least when I got in the field, and many of you, the elderly, in a sense, were disenfranchised. They were, to some extent, weak. They were frail. They were powerless. They had no clout. I think we'd all come to agree that extraordinary things have happened over the past several decades. More and more we find that indeed it is the elderly who have the greatest amount of clout, who understand how to manipulate and use the political system the best, who vote in the greatest numbers, who've got representation in Washington like no other age group, who've got memberships in organizations like AARP that history has never seen before. At the same time, we're seeing a huge alteration in what a long life is, and therefore at what points do we mark various moments, and in the heft and weight of the percentage of our population that is indeed older. And also in the extraordinary uprising of power and strength and resourcefulness of this generation. We're also seeing changes in our own lives. We all see it in what it means to grow as we age. More and more people going back to school at 50, falling in love at 70, starting businesses at 90. As has been mentioned, the idea of this linear life plan, which was historically the model of of schooling, then work, and then retirement, then death, is now giving birth to a cyclic life plan, where people intersperse work, leisure, and indeed recreation/retirement multiple times throughout their life cycle. I'd like to suggest that perhaps it's time we think of 21st century markers of aging. I was in Tyler, Texas last year or so. And I asked an audience of 1,000 retirees, let's do a vote to see at what age you think people should be thought of as old. And I gave them a choice of 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, and 85. And the audience came back somewhere split between 75 and 80. And I said to them, so from your life experience, you don't think that people are growing old as early as they used to, it's happening later. Absolutely, everyone said. I said, so you feel that the new marker of aging should be somewhere around 75 if there were an age? Yes, they said. Then I said, oh, so then I suppose you won't mind not getting your benefits until you're 75. No, 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 you don't understand, they said. I would argue that that's an interesting and provocative consideration. What would happen if life expectancy went up 1,000 years, just to be ridiculous? Would we still think that people were old at 65 and put them on pensions? Would we expect that people would only work till they're 61 and a half, which is the average retirement age right now in this country? Or do we need to somehow configure a concept of who we are and how old we are based on how long a life is and how productive and capable we might be indeed in this new era? I would also argue that I think we've made a bit of an error in our interpretation of our mission. And I mean to be a bit obnoxious, and I apologize if I offend. As best as I can tell, this is the American Society on Aging. We've got the National Council on Aging. We've got the Administration on Aging. Yet I would argue that the overwhelming focus of our field has been on the aged. And not only on the aged, but those portions of the aged for whom the kinds of programs that are supported by your types of organizations could be recipients for. There are many more people in America who are aged, who need help and guidance and support. And there are many, 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 many more of us who are aging. My children are aging, and they have no understanding whatsoever of what's to come. We should be teaching gerontology to children. Those of us in our 30s and 40s should get the wisdom of this field. And I would concern myself that the current aged and those who serve them, in a sense, have put a lock on the entire focus of this enterprise. And I think that's dangerous. My second point, I think we need a more aspirational, positive role and responsible role for elders. I'm not quite sure that people have a vision, other than folks like Betty and folks that come in contact with Betty, as to what I'm supposed to be when I'm 60 or 70 or 80. Indeed, if you were to look at what people actually do with their lives, we could argue that the entire purpose of human evolution was to create enough years at the end of life so that people could average 43 hours of television viewing a week, which is what retirees do. They spend 43 hours a week on average watching television. Now, it's not clear to me what the best role is for elders. I would argue it's not to be young forever. I agree. That's kind of ridiculous. If my 7-year-old daughter wants to be 3 again, we take her to the social worker. If my mom, who's 71, wants to be 26 again, maybe that's not right either. Perhaps we need to be thinking about what is the purpose of the long life. Kind of work that Chuck Fahey's doing, the third age, the idea of creating a vision, but we need to popularize it. Should more elders be mentoring? Should they be volunteering? Should they be leaders? Or should they be self-absorbed as a gerontocracy? I hope not. I hope not. We talk a lot about how the elders should put kids first. I've seen not as much of that as I would like. We've seen a lot about how the elders should concern themselves with future generations, the extraordinary contributions of Eric and Joan Erickson. Yet, boy, I don't see as much of that as I would like. I think we need a new and more responsible role for elders, and most likely it needs to be elders who bring that forward. Certainly those of us who are not yet there can think about it. We'd love to be a part of the debate and discussion. I think that's critical. Third, healthy aging is essential, not just nice, but essential for a viable future. I can tell you that if we grow old and live a very long time very sick, there will be no future to America. None. None to the world. And there's a myth that comes to my mind. It's the myth of the beautiful goddess Eos, who went to talk to Zeus because she had fallen in love with a mortal man, Tithonius. She wouldn't die, he would. She wanted to love him forever. So she said to Zeus, would you please grant me one wish? What is that? Please give Tithonius immortality. Zeus said, are you sure that's what he wants? Sure that's what you want? Yes. Done, Zeus said. She left Zeus's chambers and she realized she forgot to ask for health. And as the fable goes, Tithonius got older and sicker. His bones broke. He couldn't die. He developed every kind of disease you can imagine. He couldn't die. And at the end of the fable, he was a bag of bones, chirping like a cricket, could never die. We've done a very peculiar thing in the American medical system here, which is that we've put enormous emphasis on allowing people to live as long as humanly possible. But we haven't yet trained our physicians to treat the concerns of older people. We haven't yet educated our nurses to be able to deal with the needs of an aging population. We've got paltry sums of money going to conditions like Alzheimer's, arthritis, adult onset diabetes, which are crippling segments of our older population. We put enormous amounts of money into reimbursing for stays in hospitals, where more often than not what our elder population needs, first of all, on the one hand, might have been better prevention, but more likely home care, which is by and large not even reimbursable. So we're paying all this real estate for a night stay in a hospital, where for a condition of an elder person, a different level of care is required. I think we must create a healthy aging. The idea of being alive as long as we live. The idea of being productive and vital and vigorous. That doesn't mean perfectly healthy or that you're a bodybuilder or that you look like a movie star. It means to be as healthy as you can possibly be for the years that you live. I think there's several players that have to contribute. One of them is we have really got to make our medical system, as Bob is campaigning, my goodness, for 25, 30 years now, capable of meeting the needs of an aging population. People over 60 consume more than 60% of all the health services in America, and yet how can we only have 10 to 15 medical schools that even require any coursework in geriatrics? How is that conceivable? We need to spend not only time concerning ourselves with the extraordinary burden of caregiving those with Alzheimer's, but my goodness, if 47% of the 85 population has dementia, and that's the fastest growing segment of our population, is the issue more caregiving support? Possibly. But I would argue, unless we spend enormous amounts of strategic dollars now, private and public, to beat Alzheimer's, to beat arthritis, to beat these crippling conditions in the later years, we are in serious, serious, serious trouble. I'd add two other points to healthy aging. It's got to be involving of people. I can't tell you, I've had a peculiar career sort of doing this Johnny Appleseed thing. I'm out in front of audiences all the time, and I've been out in front of about 500,000 retirees in my life, and they don't look great. And there's still a lot of them who smoke, and there's a heck of a lot of them that are overweight, and about 2/3 of them don't exercise, and about 90% of them don't wear their seat belts, and about 70% of them don't make their home safe, and a lot of them don't take their medicines when they're supposed to. We can do the best we can do as the professional system, but we've got to motivate and inspire our elder and aging populations to take a heck of a lot better care of themselves and their loved ones, or else we're all in trouble. And last, I would say that if we're going to have a healthy aging system, it's got to be economically sound. And we also, at some point, are going to have to grapple with the issue of dying. We resist the idea of death profoundly in this country. When I wrote Age Wave, one of my most interesting chapters was a chapter on death. My publisher took it out, says nobody wants to know about that. Turns out some of the most popular best-selling books in the last 10 years in America have been books about death. People are talking about it. We haven't come to grips with it. Point 4. I think we need to guide the baby boomers towards successful aging. One of the things, and Maggie Kuhn was my inspiration for a lot of my early work, and I have to tell you that having spent the first 10 years of my career in the nonprofit sector and spending so much time doing clinical work with older people, there's just tons of lessons that I've learned that I'd like to tell my friends and my kids about how to live and choices to make. By spending so much of our time on the aged and not also the aging, we're not taking the lessons learned, good and bad, from the aged and bringing them down into the aging generations who are 60, who are 40, who are 20, who are 10. I did a talk show in Seattle last year, and it was on retirement, and there was an audience supposed to come in that I was going to field questions with live television. Turns out a group of first graders came in, and the producer realized that she had scheduled the wrong group on the wrong day. And instead, so I turned to the audience after a 15-minute interview, and they said, "Any questions?" And I have to tell you, it was one of the most fun things I've ever done. How can we only learn about aging when we're old? Why don't we learn about it all our life? I would tell you that for the baby boomers, unless they smarten up and learn some of the lessons of their parents and grandparents in areas having to do with disease prevention, in areas having to do with being able to be lifelong educated, is the issue retirement, or is the issue I'm scared of starting all over in a new career, or I've been rendered obsolete by new technologies? In a changing time, in a longer lived period, we're all going to have to learn 5 or 6 or 7 skill bases in our lifetime, and so the ability to be a beginner again is essential. I would tell you that boomers are going to have to learn about change and flexibility. because the good and bad of aging is that sometimes it brings you messages you didn't expect, and even sometimes ones you didn't like. Financial competency, a major issue. It strikes me that my generation, 1/2 of the baby boomers, have done absolutely nothing to prepare financially for retirement. I was at a program that Neil Cutler did a few weeks ago, and Neil talked about the need for financial literacy. I think it's an extremely important issue. And by the way, don't be faked out by the idea that there's some baby boomers that are wealthy. There's a lot more baby boomers that are poor. And don't be faked out by the idea that some of the baby boomers are making a lot of money. There's a lot of high-income poverty in America. There's a lot of people making $100,000 a year haven't saved a nickel for retirement, aren't paying their bills. Retirement planning, dealing with elder care, knowing how to love and care for our parents, helping us put our kids through college, which while we're worrying about capping health care, college rates are going berserk right now. So around the same time, I'm going to be wondering if I can support my mom and dad or put myself into retirement, which I don't expect to do anyhow. I'm being told it's going to cost $250,000 each to put my kids through college. That's ridiculous. And ultimately, our own medical and long-term care will be a challenge for this generation. And my fifth and final point, I haven't even gotten a 5-minute warning here, Fernando. I'm running ahead of time here. Maybe I can tell a joke or two. I feel better now. Now I got to regroup myself. My fifth and final point has been my own sort of personal crusade for the past 10 years, and it's been a perplexing one because I wish there had been more people that I could talk to about it, because I'm ultimately come to believe that I think it's extremely critical. And it's what I would say, there's an absolute and desperate need to gerontologize America. An absolute and desperate need to gerontologize America. Part of the peculiarity of my background is that having spent 10 years in the nonprofit sector, then 10 years in the for-profit sector, there's lessons and talents of both. And I'll give you a lesson for the nonprofit sector from the marketplace. A number of years ago, sugar substitutes came on the market, and one company called Pareve came out with a thing called Sweet and Low. And they felt that the ultimate location for that product was to put it in a little pink container and put it in luncheonettes and let people put it in their coffee. Another company, Monsanto, came out with a product called aspartame. It's called NutraSweet. And they decided that the best way to utilize that product was to make it an ingredient in 10,000 other products. I would argue that while it's absolutely essential that those people who come in direct, full-time contact with elder men and women are fully skilled, and I think we're not yet, but become more fully skilled to meet the needs of an aging population, I would also argue, gee, don't you think we ought to also train the media? So I have to tell you, I get at least 5 calls a day, every day of my year, from people in the media wanting to do stories on aging, and it's almost always the same. It's some 27-year-old kid that's just been assigned the aging beat, and they haven't the foggiest idea what aging is or who the elderly are or what the issues are. They don't even know what questions to ask. They mean well. We've got to embrace the idea of helping the communications instruments of this nation deal with the extraordinary complexity and incredible challenges, mostly positive, of a long-lived society. What about OTC, over-the-counter drugs? 51% of all OTC are consumed by people over 50. A year ago, we helped Tylenol come out with the Fast Cap, which everybody thought was a marketing stroke of genius. Give me a break. I mean, Tylenol, which is a wonderful company, decided that why not make a container that people who use the product can actually open? The whole world of urban design, why is it that our public buildings are so cold? Museums, the auditory systems are terrible. Concert halls, you can't sit in the chairs, just like here. The typeface in all the books, and the newspapers is too small. I flew in on a plane the other day. There was an elder couple next to me getting their bags up in the upper compartment and having to drag them through the airports was impossible. The food industry has not paid much attention to the needs of an aging population. Even the containers are hard to open and close. Buttons are impossible to open. We've got 40 million people with arthritis. 2/3 of all women over 65 are single. How the heck are they going to open and close the clasps at the bottom of their dresses? The level of gerontologic naivete and ignorance in our society, for obvious reasons, we've been youth-challenged and youth-obsessed, is profound. community centers. I would love to see many of the good works going on in senior centers going on in churches, in YMCAs, in Jewish community centers, multi-generational programs. So let's teach the educators and the adult education programmers and the parks and recreations people to understand how to deal with multiple generations. The greeting card industry, my goodness, finally Hallmark has come out with a few positive cards, but they're abominations to the positive process of aging. You know, there ought to be a Betty Friedan line of business cards. You know, let's make colleges comfortable for an older body to sit in, and let's make teachers less pedantic and authoritarian. My goodness, I would hope that when I go back to school at 50 or 60 or 70, some jerky teacher's not going to wave grades over my head. I mean, mature people don't like to learn that way. Elder hostels, for me, is one of the great things going on in America. SeniorNet is a vision of the future. But the issue is, should we simply keep doing what we're doing and train our students in gerontology to work in nursing homes or in social service organizations for the elderly, or are we going to embrace the entire aging issue and be the messengers, be the gatekeepers, and disseminate to 10,000 different institutions and organizations the lessons needed to be an aging society? Last point I'd like to make as part of this Gerontologizing America. Good, I'm on schedule. I would have to tell you that I think one of the silly mistakes we're making in this field, and I apologize for being rude if this is offensive to people, is that I think that we have somehow, this particular field of aging is very anti-business. And maybe the greed side of business is something that should be battled against. But I would tell you, having worn both hats and therefore being sort of a gerontologic mutant in a way, I think there's talents from both sides. For example, for me, from the Aging Network, extraordinary knowledge and compassion. I've never really seen it anywhere else in any other field or industry. A sensitivity and a compassion and a concern for the needs of an aging population that is absolutely extraordinary. From the business community, incredible capital. You know, I've seen companies spend $50 million in a month launching a new car, and that's the entire budget, one of the budgets Bob referred to. There's enormous amounts of money out there if you know how to work with it. Creativity, fabulous creativity in the business sector, just extraordinary. Learning how to make a message come about, how to motivate people, how to educate people, how to train people, technologies that exist that never existed before. But I would tell you, for me, the most interesting lesson to be learned from the marketing side. And marketing to me is not about selling or forcing somebody to buy something. Marketing is about really trying to figure out what people need and then doing your best job to get it to them at the lowest cost, whether it's being paid for by the government or by that individual. I don't think we've learned the lesson of marketing in the nonprofit sector. If a person is hungry, maybe they need a meal program, not an hour with a physician. If a person is depressed, maybe they need a friend, somebody to talk to, something worthwhile to do, not necessarily medicine. If a person is poor, they probably need financial help. If a person is not poor, maybe they don't. I think all too often we have not learned the lesson of finding out that there's not one old person out there that they all need the same thing, the same benefits, the same Social Security, the same Medicare, the same lifestyle. They don't. Some need more, some need less. For example, for the overwhelming majority of white elder Americans, poverty is not in their face right now. And that's good. That's because of the great works that have occurred over the last 20 years. Only about 11% of white elder Americans are poor. But you look at African American single women or Hispanic single women, it's a 50% poverty level. We're clearly not doing the job there that we must. I mentioned earlier in a press conference, when I was in high school, I grew up in a poor neighborhood. My high school was overwhelmingly non-white, and we were considered culturally deprived. So everybody in the high school was given a program that they thought would help us. And the program was every single member of my high school received a copy of the Brothers Karamazov. Now that's bizarre and silly. By the way, it happens to be true. Weequahic High School, Newark, New Jersey, 1966. My concern is, let's really figure out who needs what. Maybe the rich don't need as much support. Maybe the poor need more. Maybe the sick need better home care, not institutionalization. The more we can learn the lessons of targeting and meeting the real needs of real people, not just talking about a big mass and defending a big mass and getting all upset with programs if they're going to be cut or changed. All programs need to be cut or changed. All living elements need to be groomed and pruned and made better. And so, in closing, I think we have a truly extraordinary challenge. Throughout history, people have searched the globe for spices so that we could live the long life. They founded civilizations such as ours in that pursuit. The alchemists looked to rid the body of impurities so we could live forever. Alchemy led to chemistry, led to medicine. Billions of dollars have been spent in search of what we are about to have, the chance to live the long life. What is my belief about what this field ought to be? And I wrote it down. I think we need to midwife the dream of history. I think we need to midwife the emergence of a long-lived, vital, productive, compassionate, multi-generational society. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for your creativity and your ideas. We will take about just 15, 20 minutes more. I think you'll agree that this is a tremendous opportunity having them with us. Just a personal note, I'm certainly pleased that I don't have to give a presentation. It would be like following not just Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, but also Roberto Clemente. And so, well, he did go to Newark, so. So I'd just like to throw out a quick question, and I'd like to just begin with Ken, and if you can just give a quick 1-2 minute response, and Betty and Bob, and then just debate and discuss among yourselves until I bang down my cane and time is up. But just to bring us down to a little bit of reality, all of you in many ways gave us a message of hope, of optimism, that in fact there's much to look forward to and there's much that is doable. Today, however, we face a very difficult and in some respects a very mean-spirited public and political mood, which is almost a retraction of everything that might be necessary to move towards your vision, to move towards that paradigm. What are your thoughts on how we confront the political and fiscal realities and the sense that the public supposedly has a mandate to eliminate government, reduce taxes, eliminate the social safety net, and in my own words, create a Darwinian sort of atmosphere? If that's true, what does it mean for your vision? If it's not true, how do we respond?
I don't believe that's what's going on, personally. So let me start from there. I don't believe that the forces of bad and evil and meanness are overrunning the land. I believe there are individuals who are mean-spirited, and I believe that there are bad ideas out there. But I would also argue that much of what we have in place is not perfect either. And I view that kind of provocation. By the way, it happens with companies more often than nonprofits. At companies, it happens because people stop buying your product, or the competitor takes over. And you're forced to sort of think about what could we be doing better. I view this as a fabulous and refreshing time for provocative, bold new thinking, which will probably construct an arrangement that is not radically different than the one we have, but will make changes. We have to deal with the fact that there is only a limited amount of financial resources in this country. And it's disconcerting to me when people say we need more, 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 but we're not willing to give up anything. I mean, there's got to be compromises. I'm not going to go into a long story on this, except to say that from my view, I see an enormous concern among people of all generations to attempt to try to configure a future that is financially secure now and tomorrow. And I think we've got a number of forces at play, representative organizations within the field of aging, to attempt to hold on to the most important and the very best, which I can't imagine are going to be lost, frankly, from my vantage point. The thing that concerns me the most, and I offer it more as in the spirit of democracy, is that I like the idea of free thought and free speech. And I worry that all too often we've been sloganeering on some of these issues and saying, oh, we're going to battle means testing, or Medicare's got to be I personally feel that if Medicare has got more money in it, but all the doctors aren't well trained against geriatrics, have we solved the problem? Indeed, if doctors were better trained and long-term care were more in place, we'd probably need to spend less money in Medicare. So for me, the issue is not simply about taking one line or another line. I really feel, and I would wish from this great organization, that there would be more opportunity without getting sort of, blackballed by the gray lobby, to simply say, let's really take a look at this. And by the way, unless we seriously reflect on how to create a multi-generational society that works for all parties, and think of it as in an economically sound way, someone else will. So unless we've done our homework and we've carefully thought it through, which means bringing some new things in and letting go of some other things, I don't think we've engaged in the process of free and creative development and strategy for a new millennium. And I think we need to do more of that. So I don't think it's all as bad as it might look.
I don't agree with you. I think that there's a con game going on here. And it's a very dangerous political con game, the so-called contract with America. I know that a Georgian is the leader of that. Too bad. But it's as if it's a contract for the already rich white male. And it says, and you know, we have to cut school lunches, welfare, aid to pregnant women that are not prosperous enough to get adequate nutrition, cut aid to infants, ultimately cut Medicare, cut Social Security, in order to have a 50% cut in the capital gains tax for the already rich, in order to have a forgiving of corporate taxes, in order to have a tax cut that will mainly benefit the top 2% of the wealthy people of the nation who are already accumulating more and more of the resources. And this is outrageous. This is a violation of all the principles of democracy and of all of the movement of equality, and then hide what you're doing by polarizing, seeming to pit women, blacks, minorities, legal and illegal immigrants against white males, the so-called angry white male. And I think I think also, I'm not utterly pessimistic, because I do not think that's what the people voted for. I think that, first of all, an awful lot of people didn't vote because, and Ken is right on that, I mean, there was some kind of spreading corruption, collusion, apathy, a lack of vision, a lack of ideals, a lack of, on the part of the people that were controlling the government, and the people out there were disgusted, and there's been this job downsizing that has made the white male feel very insecure, and that all has been manipulated by the spin doctors into polarizing group against group, and then afflicting the already afflicted, making the poor lose their social safety net in order to give tax breaks to the very rich. I don't think it's what the people voted for, and I think if there is proper vision and leadership, and it's sort of a rising out of the stunned, apathetic passivity that seems to have afflicted a lot of our leaders, if there is proper vision and leadership, that you will get this group of greedy white males voted out of office.
As you can see, Bob, as you can see, Ken and Betty are somewhat reticent to express their views on that question. Perhaps you could shed some light on it.
Well, you've come to the right person. As a rational, moderate individual, I'm actually, I'm afraid, closer to Betty than I am to Ken on this one, with one exception. I do think Justice Holmes was right. The taxes are the price of civilization. And to destroy the arts, the humanities, public broadcasting, in addition to what we're doing to children, etc., to me is quite unacceptable. On the other hand, just looking at my own field of medicine, I do believe there are major reforms that do have to be undertaken. I believe that rationalization of the system, or making more rational the system, we frankly would need one more dollar than we already have. We need to integrate acute care and long-term care effectively. We need to promote health promotion and disease prevention. We need to make a proper investment in research. We need to help people become responsible for their own health, but without refusing to take responsibility ourselves for the provision of care to our patients. So I do think there are reforms that are in order. I do think that the money liberated could certainly be spent for other good things, like the education of children, for example, for better protection of women in terms of abuse and the many problems they face, for an equalization of pay between women and men, which still does not occur, so that I do kind of take the most rational and the most moderate position between these two.
Let me then throw out, as we wind down here, more of a kind of a how do we get about doing our business type question. How can we get out this message about aging? I think the three of you have each given insights, none of which are contradictory to each other, but all of which require a level of educating and sensitivity, and as you've said earlier, a paradigm shift in how the public, and particularly taxpayers, view aging and what is occurring. What recommendations would you have that are real, that could be done in the next few weeks, the next few months, the next year?
I'll be particularly brief on this because I've got more to say than I could say now. I have to say I think the time's come. I think that this volcanic movement towards a recognition of aging is in a completely different moment than it was 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. We've all seen that with our books. We've seen that on the media tours. We've seen that in terms of the kinds of people. It used to be I'd be on a plane and somebody says, what do you do? I work in the aging field. Oh, that's too bad. Now people say, hey, that's really interesting. I'm reading a lot about that these days. I think the time is now. I think there's been an enormous amount of inbreeding. We've got tens of thousands of highly skilled, well-trained, dedicated individuals who know a great deal about this subject. And we need to turn outside the circle and get more on the local news. We need to get more in the local colleges. We need to get more funding for documentaries and programs for kids. I could go on, but for me, I think the message is waiting to be carried, and the recipients are eager to learn. And I think that more people like the Betty Friedans of the world and the Bob Butlers and Fernandos and many of you in this room, we need to be talking to other professional associations. We need to be talking to the general community. We need to be speaking out. We need to be raising this whole theme to a greater level of awareness. I think we're too shy with our story.
Well, the first step in paradigm shift, the first step in a revolution such as we're talking about here is consciousness. And what we're doing here, and insofar as that is covered by the media, is a change consciousness, is a move toward the paradigm shift. Whenever we blow the whistle on a denigrating or false image of age, whenever we promulgate a discussion in terms of the new paradigm, the mass media is extremely important here. The youth obsession of the mass media. One of my projects, my Women, Men, and Media project, we had a session to which a lot of magazine editors and publishers came on the obsolete images of beauty, and a discussion of an image of beauty promulgated by the fashion magazines, for instance, in terms of a prepubescent-looking, anorexic, like 15-year-old invitation to pedophilia, and that should be the model of beauty for a society in which more and more women are moving their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond with enormous vivacity and style and elegance. It's outrageous. And it was interesting how that was picked up. I mean, in other words, it doesn't always have to be big, scientific discussion. It can, although it's very interesting and important to promote the scientific findings that, for instance, I sometimes felt that I was the only person that ever dug through all that research in Baltimore, because it was all in there, but nobody had ever put it forward in ways that people could understand. I think that because of the market, because of the fact that the baby boomers will hit their 50th birthday next year, and that is the biggest group in the whole population, and everyone wanted the 18 to 39 market. 18 to 39, you have an older character, kill that character off. All you want is 18 to 39. Well, they're now, going to be 49 to 79, that market. And they're going to be waking up to it. And suddenly you're going to see models that are not just 17-year-old with one line painted on their face for, she wasn't born yesterday. She was born the day before yesterday. But you will see real heroines and heroes, and you're beginning to see it in the movies. You're beginning to see some of the movies. That movie with Clint Eastwood, Line of Fire, and I mean, he was huffing and puffing as he chugged along, beside the presidential car, and he was supposed to be over the hill, but what he had up here, he got the assassin before he could kill the president. But what happens in the end? He gets the 20-year-old FBI girl. So, breaking through for men, it'll take longer to do it for women, but it's going to happen quicker than you think.
Betty, Given that Clint Eastwood is one of my favorite actors and he lives in Monterey County where I'm from, I'll let him know that you were not fully pleased with the outcome. And then from our more moderate, rational colleague, Bob Butler, your thoughts, ideas?
Some of you may remember in War and Peace, Tolstoy's War and Peace, Pierre said, if people can conspire together, bad people can conspire together, why can't good people conspire together? So I would urge you all to recognize that there's a distinct difference between the words citizen and subject. We're not subject to a crown. We are citizens, and we really must exercise that right. And on May 2nd to 5th is the White House Conference on Aging. I would be interested in knowing how many of you are delegates there. Are there any? Good. You could play a part, for example, in helping to make that paradigm shift, to try to recognize these two great streams of growing older individuals that we have in this century, the largest of which is vital, productive, contributing older persons, and the smaller but very significant number of which are those that are impaired and for which we must provide the best of care. So I invite you to certainly play a vital role in that White House conference, and if you're not attending, that doesn't mean you can't play a part in terms of letters, in terms of reaching your congressional representation, and as we see federalism at work, reaching people in the state government. I agree very much with Betty about, and both, I know Ken feels the same way too, about media. One of the things that we have done at Mount Sinai is we have had a special relationship with the Columbia School of Journalism over the last, maybe 7 or 8 years. Each year, something like 150 students graduate. It's a one-year school. Many of them have actually already been in the media, the electronic or print media. We can give them an introduction to the 21st century, even greater revolution and longevity, right there in terms of being able to work with them. And within 1 year, they're already in the newsrooms and in the radio stations and in the TV stations. Also, I would like to make just one final point, and that is this reference that's been made frequently to the baby boomers. It's absolutely correct. That is potentially the transformative generation. We didn't have enough diapers for them when they were born. We didn't have enough places in schools. We didn't have enough jobs and housing. And are we also not going to have a decent late life for them? Perhaps it's going to be too late for some of them in terms of succeeding in developing the very necessary social protections, the very necessary long-term care, the breakthroughs in research. But I do think, despite all of that, they are likely to be the transformative generation that will help make old age better. So I really would encourage that as one part of your answer, to do everything we can to reach that generation directly with the story of the longevity revolution.
Thank you. We have now reached the end of what has been, I think, a tremendous session. It has been a treat for me. I think it's been a treat for all of us to have these three individuals share their guidance and their ideas and their insights and their experience. We could not have done a better job, nor could the American Society on Aging, than to have them here with you, for you. Let's give them all a round of applause. Bob Butler, Betty Friedan, Ken Dychtwald. There is much work for us to do. There is much work for all of us to do. Let us go forth and enjoy this great adventure. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conference.